And welcome back to BGFC Weekly, where we talk about all things our Golden Lions. I'm Jimmie, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, the Yale graduate and WKU women's soccer coach, Jason Neidell. Did I say that right?
Neidell.
Yep. Jason, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for being on. You're our first outside of BGFC guest that we've had, so I'm very excited to have you. No pressure.
Wow, I feel extremely privileged. That is a lot of pressure, some big shoes to fill. I was watching some of the other podcasts, so got some big shoes to fill today.
You were talking about you watched AJ's and Michael's and stuff like that before, so best of luck following them.
No, thanks.
On today's show, we'll not only be talking with Coach about WKU women's soccer season, but also some other things related to collegiate sports, especially how like NIL is affecting college soccer, how college realignment is affecting soccer. But before we jump into all of those things, we still want to take a peek at the UPSL National Tournament. So at the time of recording, we had just finished the round of 8 for Beeman United. So they took on, as a reminder, Georgia FC. If you remember back to our previous podcast, Michael and I both took Beeman to win over Georgia. I took the game 4-2, and I said the over-under for the game would be 5 total goals. And I'm very happy to say that if you took the over in that one, you're doing pretty well. It did not turn out in any way, shape, or fashion how we thought, however. Beeman United 6, Georgia FC 3. So for folks that didn't get a chance to watch it, Georgia jumped out to a 3-0 halftime lead. It really was in control of that game in the first half. Coach, when you're going into halftime down 3-0, how do you respond?
Well, it's a knockout round, so you're trying to revisit your tactics and probably thinking about how to throw everyone forward to at least get that first goal back to get you back in a position where you can get back into the game.
Right, because once you get that first one, then you can start trying to get momentum going.
The problem with it, obviously they won the game, six consecutive unanswered goals.
Yeah.
But, obviously the problem with it is if you're down 3-0, you're throwing numbers forward and you get a fourth one scored on you,
it's over.
Yeah, it's over at that point.
So that's actually a really good point. I wanted to ask you about it. Scoring 6 goals in one half, not an easy feat for any team. Manchester United, DC United, anybody. That's an impressive feat to happen. How do you look to capitalize and ride that lightning into your next game?
Wow. Obviously they were able to figure out maybe some weak spots in the opponent and attack those. Obviously they're going to be different in the next game, but and you want to continue to be good at the things you're good at and try and scout your opponent and figure out what you need to do to create chances. But yeah, I mean, you're right. 6 goals in a game is a lot. 9 goals in a game is a lot.
Yeah, for a total. Yeah, that's a lot. And it's funny because, so some people that I talk to in the soccer community, they're like, why do you keep saying these high totals? Nobody ever scores that high. Hello, 9 in this one game. Come on.
Well, I can say, unfortunately, when we start talking about WKU Soccer, most of our games are pretty low scoring. So okay,
I will duly note that because, we will be talking about you all this season on the podcast, just briefly mentioning how good you all are doing, of course. So I'll make sure my predictions stay 2-1 at most. So now that sets up a Elite 8 matchup between Beeman United and Lakeland United. Both of teams will be having to travel for that game as it'll be held in Evans, Georgia, which is kind of like northwest of Augusta, Georgia, about a 6-hour drive for both teams. So, Coach, my question for you, what goes into preparing a team for an Elite 8, a Final Four kind of a situation? What goes into that?
Yeah, I think first there's a psychology to it. I think just trying to stay level-headed. You don't want to get too high or too low, and make sure you're focusing on things that that your team's good at, and hanging your hat on kind of your style of play and what your identity's been all year long. I don't think you want to change too much. I think the other thing is I think you want to just physically and mentally try to stay in a similar routine to what you've been in all year long. And then the last thing, I think just physically probably at this point in league play or in the season, you probably want to be tapering. You don't want to be doing super heavy practice. You want to be conserving your legs for the big game.
Right. So when you get late in the season like that, how much gas do you take off? Is it a 50% practice? Is it 75? How do you approach stuff like that?
I think it's a little bit of a feel for the team. I don't know what kind of technology they have as far as GPS wearables and stuff like that. But that stuff can become important too. But probably by the end of the season, there's probably not a single player that's playing at 100% capacity.
No.
They're probably compromised to some degree based on fatigue and the wear and tear of the season. So, I think you want to keep it light and keep your guys as recovered and fresh as possible.
Absolutely. And, you got to make lots of subs to do stuff like that. So you've got to make sure that, if you have younger players, they're up to par and ready to go with everyone else. But yeah, it's no easy feat for any team. So we're proud of them being in the Kentucky-Tennessee Premier Division with them. Really are rooting for them against Lakeland. Just quickly, for those, if you take a quick Google for Lakeland United, they have a really beautiful crest. It's like a nice light blue. It's got a swan on it. Like, it's really good. It's quality.
Well, you also mentioned something that's going to probably be important is in this league, you've got some really young players, aspiring players, but then you've got some older veterans too. And how you're managing your roster with the older players who are probably more fatigued at this point, and the younger players who probably have a bunch of energy still left. How you manage and approach the game within the profile of your team is going to be important too.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point because Beeman does have that. They have a couple of MLS-ish players. There were a couple of, I think there are 3 or 4 players from the Nashville SC era of Nashville MLS franchise that are still on the Beeman team. So those players are in their mid to maybe even later 30s at this point, and they do have some pretty good younger players as well. So I think it was a great point, to say you got to manage one set of legs, but also you got to keep the younger guys ready as well.
Absolutely.
So, Lakeland, going back to them, they did not have a great regular season. They went 4-4-2, so 4 wins, 4 losses, and 2 draws in the West Florida division. They finished 5th and barely snuck in, but they are on a burner. They beat the number 4 seed, the number 1 seed, and the number 2 seed, all in the Florida division to make it to the national tournament. They won the round of 32 and the round of 16 on PKs. So this team is on fire. So, Coach, when you've got a team that, was kind of middle of the table all year, but then it just taken off like a rocket, how do you manage that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just keeping perspective and certainly not underestimating them. I think
absolutely
do your homework, make sure you're prepared as you would be for any other game. Obviously, the game's at this point is way more important anyway, so I don't think anyone's taking any opponent lightly. But
no.
But yeah, that's they probably they figured things out. It's all about peaking at the right time.
Absolutely. So, Coach, I don't know if you've paid much attention. Do you want to throw out a prediction for Beeman Lakeland?
Sounds like it's going to be high scoring. I don't know.
Okay, so you're going high scoring. What, 4-2?
4-1.
4-1. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go 3-1, so I'm not too far off from you. I'll set the over-under at 4. But please make sure you go down into the comments, especially if you're watching this on YouTube. Let us know your score of what you think the final score for Beeman United, Lakeland United will be. But now, Coach, let's jump in. Let's start talking about you a little bit more. Let's talk about your playing career. Let's let the audience kind of get to know you a little bit more. So talk to me about what was your first memory of soccer as a kid?
First memory of soccer, probably trying to chase my older brother around. He was 3 years older than me. He was a big, strong kid, used his physicality to be a really good player at a young age. And I was always trying to play with the older boys, so probably just chasing them around just in the backyard and stuff like that.
Sure. So did y'all play anything else other than soccer?
Played some football growing up.
Oh, okay. What position?
But I was a place kicker.
Okay.
So sometimes that qualifies, sometimes it doesn't. But I didn't really enjoy that very much because it wasn't active enough because you come out on the field for 30 seconds here and there.
If that, your kick may take 6-7 seconds and then you're back off.
Yeah, so a lot of pressure on place kickers, but they're not really a part of the team. They're kind of separated.
Right.
And so it wasn't what I wanted from a team sport.
Yeah. And, I can definitely talk about that. I played American football up through high school. I was not very good. This isn't like one of those stories where it's like, oh, he was great. No, I was barely a starter my senior year because we had nobody else. But, you talk a lot about kickers not being part of the team. That is a very true aspect. Like even as, I was an offensive lineman, the kicker would come in for 15, 20 minutes of practice and then we'll get to leave. Meanwhile, me and the rest of the guys, we're fighting it out for 2 hours. So it is important, to manage a team like that to where you can keep them involved in the team. But, sometimes it's just different coaches have different strategies, I guess.
Absolutely.
What was the longest field goal you ever hit?
In practice, I hit a 57-yarder with a stiff wind behind me. In a game, the longest I ever made was a 43.
That's still pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a fun experience, but soccer is my first and true love. So
okay, so we talked about a big highlight for American football. What was your biggest youth highlight as a soccer player? Any championships as a kid or anything? Yeah,
probably the biggest youth highlight was going to the under 14 USYS regionals when that was still the big thing in youth soccer. I mean, nowadays there's so many other tournaments and national championships, but we went to the Southern regionals as 13 or 14-year-olds, and we won the Southern regionals.
Hey, there you go. Now, where was that at?
We did it. It was in Memphis, Tennessee that year.
Okay. Well, where was your team from?
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, so that was something I couldn't nail down. So I have a question here in a second about you playing in Tulsa as a professional, but I couldn't tell exactly where you're from.
Yeah, no, I grew up. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and went to kindergarten through K through 12 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and played soccer there.
Awesome. So you took that youth career in Tulsa. You went to Yale. You led Yale to the Final 8 in '91. Is that right? In the NCAA tournament?
I wouldn't say I led them. I was a part of the team.
Your WKU profile says you led the team.
Well, I might have walked out on the field first once that year.
Because that was your freshman year?
That was my freshman year.
Yeah. I did think I noticed that. But what was it like playing at the Ivy League level in the early 90s?
It was cold.
Yeah, I could imagine so. Especially being from Tulsa.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was a great experience. We had a really strong team my freshman and sophomore years. It was a great experience. It was a great experience of just being with like-minded people who love the sport, who wanted to aspire to be good in the classroom too. At that time, soccer was still fledgling. There wasn't any real professional soccer in the United States, and college soccer was fledgling. It's a lot different now than it was back then, but it was great. I mean, we got to play when we went to the Elite 8. We went to Virginia and played against Bruce Arena's squad. In the Elite 8.
That's cool.
They knocked us out. They went on to win the national championship that year, but that was kind of neat.
Well, and when you lose to a team that wins the national championship, you kind of feel a little bit better about yourself. Like, okay, yeah, we lost, but so Beeman, I'm looking at you. You beat us 7-2. Win this darn national championship if you make it that far and make us feel a little bit better. Please and thank you. So you talked about the early to even into the late 90s. Soccer was kind of fledgling. It wasn't as big as it is today. You still had a chance to play professionally in Tulsa and in Harrisburg. What was that like?
Yeah, so I think MLS started in 96, if I'm correct.
That sounds right.
And so I came out, I graduated in 94 from Yale, and really the only way to play professional soccer was indoor soccer. And there were two leagues at that time, the CISL, which was more of a kind of a west of the Mississippi league, and then the NPSL, which was in the Midwest and East. And so honestly, I knew I didn't want to go back to school right away, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I thought, well, I'll try and play soccer for a little while longer. So I actually went up. I was not drafted. I went up for a 2-day tryout at Harrisburg, an invite-only tryout, and I was there a full month. before they signed me to a contract.
Dang.
And
you
it was
crashing on people's couches, staying in hotels.
Well, I stayed with the host family.
Oh, okay.
And it was a really neat experience. I only played 1 year in the league. Indoor soccer is a totally different animal.
Mm-hmm.
I traded shifts with a guy named Richard Chinapoo, who was a Caribbean national team player. He was 38 at the time, and I was 22. So he kind of took me under my wing, and he mentored me. And it was just a really great experience. And it was interesting at that time because most of the NPSL were guys who went into the NPSL either straight out of high school and or didn't have college degrees. And it was really interesting because our team was one of the few teams that most of the guys had actually graduated from college.
How well did that help you all do?
Well, I think it did translate because I think that we were, fairly disciplined, a
little more developed,
liked structure. You actually that year was one of Harrisburg's best seasons. We actually went to the NPSL national finals.
Legit,
yeah, and where we got swept. So
well, it happens. Take it from us. Who knocked you out? Do you remember who?
I believe it was the St. Louis team. I don't remember. I don't remember their name back then, but it was the St. Louis. One of the St.Louis team. It might have been the St. Louis Ambush. I don't know the name, but
I'm over here really trying to rack my brain on my knowledge of the NPSL.
It was a long time ago. I'm not even sure if the league still exists. No, the Cosmos were in the NASL.
NASL.
Yeah, the National North American Soccer League. But the NPSL, like I said, was the kind of dominant league in 1995, right before MLS came out.
Gotcha.
And probably when MLS started in 96, I was probably good enough to probably have been on one of the rosters.
So what happened?
But, I got into coaching.
Okay.
But I got injured. I got into coaching. But like MLS nowadays, I'm not even close to, when I was in my prime, I'm not even close enough to being good enough for what the MLS has become now.
Well, and it has come so far. And, I was watching a podcast earlier today about, it had our current coach, and I just blanked on his name, our national team coach. Anyways, put it down in the comments because holy cow, I'm just blank. But he was talking about is it better to take an active superstar MLS player or somebody from Europe who's been riding the bench or something like that? If they're at like a top tier club, like who would be better? And his answer was surprisingly, he might even lean more towards the European player just because in practice it still may be at MLS level. So the MLS has come a long way. But we still have a long way to go to even strongly compete with those top European clubs.
Yeah, absolutely. But the MLS is playing at a really high level now.
Oh, yeah.
And soccer in the U.S., both men's and women's, has come a long ways in the 35 years that I've been associated. So.
Absolutely. So talking about coaching, what got you into coaching?
That year that I was in Harrisburg, I was hamstrung with a bunch of injuries. And I kind of just started coaching on the side because I couldn't participate at the level I wanted to, and it kind of just stuck.
Understandably so. You get to that point and you got to make a choice, and that seems like you made a good choice so far.
Hope so.
So what was were there any highlights of your coaching career prior to coming to WKU?
Yeah, I think probably most of them were in the youth game. I think I was the director of a club back in Tulsa called Tulsa Thunder that doesn't exist anymore, but we won the club's first and second state championships.
Legit,
which was super cool at the time because we were a growing club, an aspiring club. So that was kind of neat to get that feather in the cap of the club. So then you kind of took that experience and then you rolled that into the job at Western, right? Well, I was an assistant at the University of Tulsa for 5 years. Okay. And then was hired at Western Kentucky in November of 2000 to start the program in the fall of 2001. And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. You've been the only women's soccer coach, correct? Yes, sir. So what does that mean to you? Well, I think, we use this a lot in recruiting, is simply the fact that I have an attachment a sentimental attachment to our program that few coaches in any sport at any level can say that they have because I've been there the whole time.
Right.
And it's kind of like running your own business. I started it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, it's I have an ownership in it that few coaches have in their programs.
Yeah. So, and I don't know what your future plans are, but it doesn't seem to me like you would be somebody who'd be more willing to bounce to a higher position just because it's available to you.
Well, and I love WKU, and I love this community, and my wife and I and our daughter love being a part of this community.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool community to be a part of, I have to say. So let's use that and let's kind of transition a little bit. Let's start talking about NIL. I know this is something that a lot of people who follow a lot of college sports are really talking about today. But for the people who don't know what NIL or name, image, and likeness stands for, can you kind of explain it to the audience?
Yeah, so, because college athletics is amateur, student athletes aren't allowed to, have not previously been allowed to make money. Mm-hmm. What they've been allowed to do is they've been allowed to accept their scholarship, which contains five components. It contains tuition, housing, meals, books, and what's called cost of attendance, which is some spending money that they're allowed to have. But those are the five components that make up a scholarship. And within the last couple of years, they've now opened it up where now student athletes are allowed to make money based on who they are, right, and the fact that they represent their university. Mostly supposed to be done with advertising and promotional type of stuff. But it can extend to just about anything.
Because it could also be kind of like endorsements as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Endorsements are a big part of that.
Cool. So, to this point, what have you seen the NIL impact be on overall collegiate soccer?
Well, most of what our players, and I can't speak to what like Stanford's players are doing or Notre Dame's or anything like that. But most of what our student athletes have been involved in is kind of like gifts in kind and trade out and stuff like that. So they'll provide an endorsement of a product and then they'll get free product.
So something on like their social media or something like that?
Yeah.
Or
so
larger than that? So
things like liquid IV or meal prep plans or things like that is kind of what our players have seen and done. Sure. There's, I'm sure there's some monetary exchange going on in soccer, but most of what our players are getting is product in exchange for services.
So talk to me about how do you get that set up? Is that something that Western does? Is it something the athletes do? How does it work at WKU?
Yeah, so we're actually not allowed, the coaching staff isn't allowed to be involved in that process.
Okay,
that would actually make it non-compliant in regard to NCAA rules. So what the university has done, or the athletic department has done, is set up a platform where the players are able to go on the platform and make their own deals. So the university provides the platform, but the student athletes are ultimately responsible for it, responsible for tracking it, responsible for logging it, and all of that stuff.
That's legit, though. I had no idea it was like that.
So I honestly don't really know much of what our players are involved in unless I see it on social media or ask them.
Or if you see them in the locker room, they're like, BioSteel, yay, or whatever.
Absolutely.
So, kind of last question on NIL here, Coach. What do you think is the long-term impact that it could have on your program? Yeah,
I mean, I don't. It's going to have a long-term impact on football and basketball.
Yep.
And that's changing the landscape completely in those sports. But I think for the Olympic sports, and in particular women's soccer, I think where it impacts us is not necessarily who can get the biggest NIL deals, but what it does is it perhaps changes the landscape of priorities. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is we need and we want our players to be student athletes, right? We need them to want to do well in school, and we need them to want to win championships on the soccer field. And where the NIL comes in is it becomes a distraction, one of many other distractions of where you're prioritizing and spending your time. Are you trying to make social media deals, or are you interested in practicing soccer to make yourself the best soccer player you can? So I think where it becomes a challenge for us is just managing priorities.
So how do you help the athletes manage those priorities?
Well, I think it's on the front end. I think it's on the front end of them understanding that, they're there to be a student and an athlete, and we're in the business of trying to win championships if we can. And the deals that you okay? And the deals that they might be able to get through NIL are certainly secondary to the things that we're trying to accomplish as a team.
Yep. And now that I just lost one of my 9 lives there, Coach, this is why they tell you in radio. No, I have my own drink over here. That's why they tell you in radio and in TV, don't drink, don't eat nothing. And it's the first time in 9 episodes that I've done that.
Didn't realize I could get you so choked up.
Yeah. I mean, NIL is so interesting. It's causing me to cough. But no, I really like how you all have that set up for them. You seem to have it set up where they can make their choices. They can see what's available. They can see what they want to spend their time on, what they want to get out of the experience. And if it is to chase the clout and the money, you can, but it comes at a cost of playing time potentially. You're not from you, but from lack of them not spending so much effort on the field.
Yeah. I think that's what you're going to see long term.
So then let's shift gears and talk about the other giant elephant in college sports, college realignment.
Yeah,
I told you I was going to take it easy on you.
Yeah, I think we're probably headed in the direction. I still think we're a few years away, but I think we're headed in the direction of these like mega leagues or super conferences, right? Where
absolutely
the SEC is going to have 20 teams or 30 teams. The Big Ten is going to have 20 or 30 teams across the country and in divisions. I think that's probably long term the direction that we're headed, and it's all. It's all dictated by TV, TV contracts.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it specifically is because you've already kind of been through it a little bit. So taking, the WKU teams from the Sun Belt to Conference USA in the mid 2000s, what was that experience like? Well,
we underestimated what that experience was going to be like. We thought, we finished the Sun Belt as the winningest soccer program at the time in the history of the Sun Belt, as far as just wins and losses. And we thought we would just jump right in and just be super competitive in Conference USA, and found that it was a much bigger step up than we thought it was going to be. And it took us probably 2 or 3 years to actually really catch up and get our feet under us.
So how did you do that catch up though? Like what went into extra recruiting?
Yeah, it was raising the recruiting ceiling and talking about some specific traits that we need in our athletes that maybe we didn't have in the Sun Belt athletes that we had. So it took a full cycle, a couple full recruiting cycles.
Yeah. Well, and, that's any relegation and promotion even. Like, if your team isn't up to snuff, you're going to keep sliding down. But when you do start going up, you've got to make sure that you've got the athletes to replace them to fill those roles.
Absolutely. I mean, in college athletics, recruiting is our lifeblood.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's all. We have 4, sometimes 5 years with a player, and then they go on and do different things. And the reality is, and we tell our players in the locker room this all the time, there's only 2 ways for us to make our program better. One is to recruit better players than what are in the locker room.
Right.
And the second one is to develop the student athletes who are currently in the locker room. Those are only 2 ways to make your program better.
Right. So, on that note, when the mega powers move, Texas, Oklahoma, USC, UCLA now, what impact will that have on collegiate soccer overall?
It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think long term, I think we're headed into a realm where we're going to see 4 divisions in college athletics instead of 3.
I could understand that.
I think the Power 5 at some point is going to break off and form a super league of some kind.
And a super duper league.
Yeah, and I don't know. So, but that's not going to happen tomorrow.
No.
But that's what I envision in a long-term landscape is instead of 3 divisions in college athletics, you might see 4.
Well, if you look back, even I think it was like 2014 or 15, the newer athletic director at Northern Illinois University proposed the group of
Power
6.
5.
No, so it's a Power 5, group of 6?
Group of 5.
Group of 5, yeah, There we go. He proposed that they have their own playoff. Let the big group have their playoff, let us have our own playoff. And it would have been exactly what you said there. It would have been 4 tiers at that point. But when it comes to soccer, though, what impact would that have on the soccer programs at, UK, Vanderbilt, Iowa, whoever?
Yeah, I mean, I think conference realignment's certainly one issue. It's already it's already hard to compete with the Power 5s as it is, just from a resource, just from a pure resource standpoint. I mean, most of the athletes that we recruit at WKU are being recruited by Power 5 schools, and so it's about finding the right niche or the right fit for some student athletes that maybe there's something that they didn't like about that Power 5 environment. Like, maybe like right now, the opportunity, maybe we can offer them more scholarship money than a Power 5, because a Power 5 might offer a kid 25% of a scholarship, and maybe we're offering that same player 100% of a scholarship. Maybe it's the opportunity to play right away, as opposed to going to a Power 5 and having to sit out a year, maybe 2 years. I
think that could be a great option for our league.
So those are things that give us some recruiting niche. But the other thing that's going on kind of behind the scenes in college athletics is they're talking about going away from, women's soccer is an equivalency sport where we're given an equivalency of 14 scholarships.
Sure.
They're actually talking about moving away from that and moving into an environment where they set roster limits. So like maybe we'd be allowed, and this is hypothetical, maybe we'd be allowed 25 players on our roster. That's what we'd be allowed. We'd be allowed no more than that. But we'd be allowed, based on what our school's available to give, we'd be allowed to give them as much money as we wanted scholarship-wise.
So you could do 25 scholarships if you wanted to.
If you had it, right? And so that's where the Power 5s obviously have a huge advantage, because they've got kind of endless banks of cash, it seems, to be able to do that sort of thing. Western Kentucky University isn't going to have 25 scholarships to give to their women's soccer players.
Right. Well, you never know. Maybe. So the Conference USA, though, they're actually going through their own transition right now with Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UAB, and UTSA all leaving for the American, Marshall, Old Dominion, and Southern Miss moving back to the Sun Belt. What will you miss most about playing the teams that are leaving?
I think the cordiality with their staffs, because I think the staffs in our league are very, very close. And then some of the some of the great rivalries that we've had with some of those schools, and some of those great games that we've had. But our league's picking up 4 schools. We actually lose Southern Miss, Old Dominion, and Marshall immediately. Oh, so they're out for this fall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
no more Huntington, West Virginia.
Yeah, that's gone right away. And then the following year we lose the big city market schools. We're certainly it's gonna be a different landscape. It's gonna look different.
No more trips to Boca.
Yeah, well, we still get to go to FIU.
Well, okay,
still
true.
Get to go to Florida,
and that's where Miami FC plays, right? The USL team, I think.
Mm-hmm. And we picked up Liberty.
Yep.
So still trip to Virginia.
New Mexico State, Jackson State, and Sam Houston.
Yep, exactly. So it's certainly gonna look different. I think time will tell.
Yeah. So with all of this movement, and so many teams moving out of Conference USA, do you know if WKU ever considered leaving?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some conversations with some different leagues about what that might look like. At the end of the day, we're in Conference USA, at least for the short term. And I think our job as coaches, whether it's volleyball, football, basketball, soccer, is to be the best version of ourselves in our league.
Absolutely.
I think heading into this fall, we want to win a championship and put our mark on the league and then, become the flagship program for the new alignment of the conference, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. And, you were talking about, you'd heard kind of some rumblings and stuff like that. I think I heard those same ones. It seemed like WKU was interested in going to the MAC, the Mid-American, which I was majorly a fan of. I graduated from Northern Illinois, so I was like, yes, WKU, NIU all day, every day, red and black all over the place. But, it seemed like the MAC also wanted MTSU, our biggest rival, of course, but MTSU didn't seem to be as interested. I don't know if you had heard similar things or.
Yeah. All I can offer is my opinion because I'm really not in the room where it happens. So
the room where it happened. Sorry.
But so we just watched that this weekend.
It's so good. I'm not even a theater guy, but it's so good.
But my understanding was it came down to some financial decisions that MTSU had to make. I think they were interested in the move, but it was going to be a pretty big financial commitment of getting out of Conference USA, but then also getting into the MAC. And so, I think it was kind of a package deal that maybe fell through kind of at the last minute.
Sure. So, like you mentioned earlier, Liberty, New Mexico State, Jackson State, Sam Houston State all coming in. What are you looking to the most about playing those teams?
Well, I just think new places to go, some new rivalries.
New Mexico State, that's Albuquerque, right?
All I know is it's like 45 minutes from El Paso.
Oh, so it's
I
not
don't
that far.
think it's.
Okay.
I don't know if it's Albuquerque. I couldn't tell you. It's a year and a half away from my memory. Right. So
it's either the Aggies or the Lobos, and I know one of them is going to be in the comments of this video and is going to be very angry at me that I got that right. There was a clip of a football referee one time that was like foul on this school, and it was the opposite, and they're like the fans just slowly started booing. So I'm looking forward to reading that on Twitter today. Thanks, everyone. Last question kind of on this, Coach. Is there any team that you would like to see Conference USA go after?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I really like that that we've been in the same league with Middle Tennessee for quite some time. I think there's a nice friendly rivalry. It's called 100 Miles a Day.
Yeah,
but it's, at least in soccer, it's a friendly rivalry.
Okay.
But that's a school that we want to continue to play against, and we want them to be in our conference. Nobody's asked me that. I mean, the nice thing about college soccer is you build your own schedule. So, I mean, you have, 8 to 11 conference games, but then you have a whole range of non-conference games that you
usually have 8 or more.
Yeah, that you get to choose. And so, who's in our conference is important, but the reality is if there's somebody that we want to play, we just email them and try to get a game with them. So
that simple? Really?
Yeah. I mean, to some degree. I mean, we've got Kentucky coming here this fall. We're going to Vanderbilt. We're going to Ole Miss. And so we've got a pretty good schedule. And so, I think it's just a matter of if there's, not necessarily who we want to be in our league, but who do we want to play year in and year out? And we pick up the phone, we call them, and we try to come to terms and arrange some games.
That's legit. And we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming schedule because there's a game that I am personally very passionate about, but we'll get there. So switching gears to 2021 Hilltoppers, 10-5-1, very good season with victories over Vanderbilt and U of L and finishing second in the East. Fell a little short, though, in the conference tournament to UAB, 1-0. What was that loss like?
It was an interesting game because we played them in the regular season at their place, and they actually really dominated us. And we snuck in a goal in overtime and won. And probably, I think in that game we were lucky to get the W and get the 3 points. And so going into the conference tournament, we knew we were facing a really, really quality opponent in our first round game. Probably not exactly who we wanted to match up with in the first round, to be honest, especially since we had beaten them against the run of play in the regular season. So, the way the game played out, we actually felt like we played them better than we did in the regular season, but just, how soccer is so often, and we just came out on the wrong end of it. So I think we were happy, disappointed in the result, but I think over the long haul, pretty happy with the season that we had. I think we overachieved in a lot of ways last year. We had our first All-American in the spring of 2021 when we won the league. Yep. And she got hurt in our last regular season game. And so we actually played the entire season last year without her. And so I think based on the fact that we didn't have what's arguably our best player, that we did some good things in the fall of 21.
Legit. So kind of looking at the transition between 21 to now 22 season, what's the roster looking like? Pretty similar, overhaul completely?
Yeah, so we have our second biggest roster in program history with 29 players.
Holy cow.
And it's the deepest roster we've ever had. We go 2, if not 3 deep in every single position on the field. And we're excited about what that means and what that looks like, because college soccer, you play multiple games in a weekend, and it's a really, really short and intense season. And so to have a roster that can do a lot of things by committee, and to be able to rest some players while other players play is extremely important in the college season. We talked a little while ago about fatigue at the end of the season.
Right.
Our hope, based on our roster, is to be fresher at the end of the season than our opponents, and to be able to make a deep run because we feel like we're a fresher, fitter team.
But with that much depth, you should be.
Well, we hope so.
I mean,
there's definitely some challenges with that, and it could easily, as a coach, it could easily backfire on you, because roster management and managing players' expectations is really challenging. And so, at the point where, like, of course, everyone wants to play, but not everyone, there's only a finite amount of playing time. And so absolutely. I think how we're managing that as a staff is going to be really, really important this year. And it could go south in a hurry and really backfire on you. And you could get, some of your troops could be, disgruntled and unhappy.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned expectations. And you said, you kind of want to throw those out. No, we're going to throw that completely out the window yet, Coach. Hold on. What are your expectations for the season? What do you want? What do you expect to happen?
Our expectation is that we're going to win a championship.
There you go.
Whether it's the regular season title or the tournament title or both, our expectations are that we're going to be a championship team.
So we're going to be in the NCAA tournament.
That's the plan.
There we go. So you start the season August 10th at 7 p.m. with a friendly versus my alma mater, Murray State University.
I did not know that.
No, yeah. For the 7th matchup for what I am dubbing the Battle for Western Kentucky. WKU has a 4-2 series lead, but Murray State did win the last matchup in 2018. What are you looking forward the most from that matchup?
Well, Murray is a fantastic side, and they're well coached, and they have a lot of really good athletes. And it does get pretty intense when we play them. It's a pretty physical battle, and so that is like the perfect game to really see what we're made of and push us to our limits in the preseason.
Right, coming right out of camp like that.
Yeah, it's going to be a great exhibition game. Like I said, they're a great team, and so. We're expecting a really, really good battle, a really good soccer game, and just one that helps hopefully prepare both teams for the road ahead.
So you mentioned, that you like the rivalry and stuff like that. Is this a game that you would like to see happen every year?
Play Murray?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's make it happen then, Coach. That is literally my dream, to see you all play every year. Because I work at Western outside of this, but as a Murray alum, I want to see the back and forth between the two schools. I think it's good for both, in my opinion. Other notable big matchups, you mentioned at Vanderbilt on August 25th, as well as hosting UK on September the 1st. How did you do that? How did that happen? You just sent the email like you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, just sent the email. Well, we usually in women's soccer, they're home and home. So when you negotiate a contract, it's usually
like Vanderbilt.
Yeah,
played here last year.
Yep.
There.
And so the UK one's interesting because we played there in 2019, and then. We were supposed to play, I think, at our place in 20, but then the pandemic hit. And then they couldn't squeeze us into the 21 schedule because theirs was already done. And so the game got pushed off basically 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And so this game is the return of the game that we had in 2019 at their place.
Okay. So, we mentioned those two matchups, or those three, I should say. What is the biggest non-conference game you're looking forward to?
I think probably Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just such a natural rivalry.
I guess.
Well, Murray's, I would say Murray, but it's exhibition.
Yeah, I got you.
So,
I will probably be at both of those games. So one I'll be in red and one I'll be in blue. I'll let you figure out which is which. So you start conference play mid-September. What do you think, or I'm sorry, who do you think will be your biggest competition this year in the conference?
Man, the league is so competitive. I could throw a dart at a dartboard to 5 or 6 teams. I think could win the whole thing. So, the league top to bottom is just really competitive. There's some new coaches in the league, so some teams might have different looks, but Rice is always good. North Texas is always good. Charlotte's always good. FAU is always good. I mean, it's
funny you're naming teams that are leaving.
Yeah.
So so it's true that for your perspective, like when they leave, y'all are sitting pretty.
Yeah, there's one of probably 6 or 7 teams that could easily win the league. And honestly, and in fairness, most of those teams are departing the league.
And, all of that kind of wraps up with the conference tournament in November in Charlotte. You mentioned NCAA tournament is the goal earlier. So therefore, I would assume your expectation is to win the conference in Charlotte?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Got to get there first, though.
Absolutely. Got a long way to go.
Got to crawl before you can walk.
Absolutely. And with that, we will kind of start to wrap up today's show. Coach, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Had a great conversation. As a reminder, we are still looking for a full-time sponsor for the podcast. If you're wanting to jump into that, please feel free to send us an email. As well as if you would like to sponsor a certain segment, if you want to sponsor the interview section, the kickoff of the show, the end of the show, we're open to any and all kind of sponsorships and partnerships. So please let us know on our social media. As well as we will be back next week. We will have the results from the final 8 of the UPSL tournament, seeing how Beeman is doing, as well as I will be joined by Director of Sports Medicine for BGFC, Sean Goulburn, to where you can talk a little bit about players' physical and mental health. Coach, I'm sure you're aware, physical and mental health, huge part of the game.
Absolutely.
So with that, please make sure to rate, comment, like, subscribe, all of that stuff to this podcast. And this is Jimmie signing off.